Can't be. So, well, folks, we got a big day today, our next to the last day, but we don't want to end on a sad note because there will be one uplifting place that you may want to consider going in a lecture that is otherwise filled by places that I would not advise you go. Certainly, the people of that day couldn't have gone, considering the times that they existed in. The first time people told me about going on a big trip to Europe, I thought, well, you must be big and important and rich. The whole travel industry has changed so much during my lifetime that it is truly amazing that those of us who are ordinary actually take these planes. But there was the time when it was limited to the first class. In any event, we're first going to talk about Japan, which would seem rather odd considering this is a course about Europe. But then we forget that Japan and China are always of interest to the British and the French, and yes, the Americans. The story of Japan is one that is truly amazing when we think about how they suddenly became an amazing power at the beginning of the 20th century. And the story still fascinates me because we think about the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, which was very naughty. If you are, you signed an agreement and you said you weren't going to be bad. So now aren't you sorry? You got to learn how to behave. And that's the problem. Japan had its own, shall we say, list of do's and don'ts. But why Japan? Well, shoot, they live out there. I mean, this is part of their world. The rest of us are just sort of getting what we can out of that area, while the Japanese have been part of that world. And we are aware that starting with that treaty in the great state of New Hampshire, we all love New England, we know, of course, that treaty basically set up Japanese interests in China in a way that would offend both China and Russia. And that was 1906. And the rest, as they say, is history when you think about World War I. And Japan goes to Paris. And, we're having a great afternoon session about the Ruhr. We would love to have you Japanese come to the meeting with us. No, you all go on. We've got some other things we need to consider. They could care less. I hate to say indifferent, but I will. Totally indifferent to European issues. If it concerned them, they were right there. Now, we're talking about Paris in 1919. So it became a very important treaty. And we've seen, of course, that there had been an Anglo-Japanese treaty and all the rest. Now, here is where we want to see 1931. So it's really going with the early Depression years. And that area of Manchuria. Actually, we have a professor in history department who's from Manchuria, which, of course, was part of the Soviet Union. And it's still Russia now. But that particular area was greatly contested. And you see it, there's Vladivostok. And so we must be near Russia. And then there's China. And then there's the Japanese, and of course, the Japanese with Korea. Because that map just has it all, and you can just see how the Japanese are probably getting a little bit cocky. Who could blame them? I mean, they had a very outstanding military. I mean, let's face it, the Russians had been humiliated. Yeah. Remember the Russian Revolution? There's a guy named Lenin. Yeah. So that was the end of that. At the same time, China, they pretty much have to just deal the best they can. China is not in good shape. That's very ironic, isn't it? Considering the power of China today, things can change in a century or two, can't they? But that is definitely the case, that the area called Manchuria, which had been a no-no, will now be taken over by the Japanese. I read the stats. There might have been 100,000 Japanese who lived there, or less. I mean, most of the people are not Japanese, but Japanese consider themselves to be the ruling group. They certainly felt that way towards Koreans, so we can assume the same would be the case in Manchuria. So they take this area over, and I guess when they are at meetings in Geneva, someone might say, you know, you really shouldn't have invaded and taken that. And it's kind of like the Japanese are going, is that really your concern? I mean, is that your business? Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very testy subject between them. I've always loved this cartoon, and it looks like a female, doesn't it? A female teacher. And she's lecturing the Japanese scholar, young scholar, saying, naughty Japan, naughty Japan. You shouldn't take other people's lands. And of course, can you all see that? Says, if you go on saying that I'm naughty, I'm leaving the school. Well, we know about bad children. And that's the idea of this. The whole league business. The league had been going on. Nobody had ever resigned. I mean, you know, if you hurt my feelings, I'm going home and take my toys. It's that kind of attitude that the Japanese are going to have. That, how dare you criticize us? And there's our little Japanese. So isn't it odd? I mean, with all of the other issues they got to face in 1931, they've got now this whole issue of Manchuria, and of course the issue of the future of Japan. Since the minute in Geneva when they condemn Japan, we are marching out. I mean, we don't stay and say, please, we really love all of you very much. Can't we, you know, and have a song, maybe a Carpenters or something to come and sing. We can all have a big hug, but no, we are gone. And what does that mean the league's going to do? Well, I'm not too sure anything, but they're not going to approve it. The man you see is one of the most famous figures in international diplomacy and indeed in military history during World War II. He went on into the Harry Truman years. He was Herbert Hoover's Secretary of State. Stimson was more or less a professional diplomat. And you say, I wonder if he worked in the mill or something. No. He is strictly of the well-to-do upper class, and he was a very powerful person. And I'm impressed with the fact that he could work for Hoover and then work for Roosevelt. But he did. That doesn't happen very often because most people who were with Hoover, you know, you're out. Retirement's looking good for you. because it was not like a good relationship between those two. You know, Hoover didn't go back to the White House until 1946. Just saying, all those years. But the fact is that probably with a lot of input from the president, Stimson announced that the United States would not recognize illegally conquered lands. And you're going like, wow, I'm so happy. That's nice. Well, what are you going to do about it? We're going to be ugly. We may not speak to you at a party. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's I guess you might say a moral kind of issue. It's sort of like we don't accept it that you have conquered this territory, which is not yours. It's called the Stimson Doctrine. It might have been called the Hoover Doctrine, but I think you would probably, if you were hanging out with other people who are interested in Asia, would probably know it better about Stimson. And that's the idea of non-recognition. And of course, Japan's no longer a member of the League, so you can't do anything to us in Geneva because we're not there anymore. I guess you'd send a letter and say, you hurt our feelings and, and all of that. But other than that, I really doubt there was much that they could do. Let me go back here because it appears that I missed. Well, I guess it's gone. But the government of Manchukuo would be the Japanese government in Manchuria. And I was saying to a couple of you yesterday that the movie about him from 1987 is considered one of the greatest films of the decade or the decade following, The Last Emperor. His name was Puyi, and the Japanese pulled him out. He was retired. His grandmother had been the ruler in his name. And he more or less, but how would you say, partied? People like that. And they don't have productive careers like we do. And so but I guess you don't have to if you're retired 20-year-old emperor. Yeah, imagine you get nice checks coming in, retirement checks or whatever. But anyway, seriously, he probably had all kinds of concubines and whatnot. And yeah, he had projects. And I imagine there was some opium. Yes, the big O was there. So Puyi was not exactly on the straight and narrow, if you get my drift. But the Japanese developed an interest in him. And believe it or not, they made him the Emperor of Manchukuo. And believe it or not, on YouTube, this is embarrassing because you don't think people really do this. But early this morning, I watched an interview with him in 1946. You say you need hobbies desperately, but it was an interview with him in 1946 during the Japanese war trials. I know. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's very nice of you. You're getting an A. The idea being that he would admit that he was merely a sort of being used by the Japanese. And I imagine, he had a nice palace. Mm-hmm. And I don't want you to think he was deprived, but I'm sure they went over the agenda and here's what you're going to say and here's what you're going to do. And is that okay with you? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. The guy this is Puyi. And I remember when he died, I was in school and I remember thinking, you were on my test. And then I let it go. God, sort of a fill in the blank, and it's like 1967. Do you remember that year? Yeah, I think some of us do. And it's like, that was very exciting for me that I knew about Puyi. Hadn't forgotten. Well, of course, old Broad Street, Wall Street, I should say, and the crowds of people in the fall of 1929. We know, of course, that the United States, by the end of the 1920s, had certainly become the center of the world economy. It was amazing, wasn't it, when you think about Britain and France and how they must have felt about it. But I thought it would be sort of interesting that this comes from a British newspaper, and they're sort of admitting it. I mean, I love them. I suffer from Anglophilia, so it's not that. It's but it is interesting that they sort of acknowledge that when you are talking about a crash on Wall Street, there's no one in that particular economy who can escape the effects. I'm no economist, but I think it was certainly clear to anyone who had followed World War I and the reparations and war debts issues of how true it was that basically American money dominated the world economy, which seems very, very interesting. But anyway, the Daily Mail, many of you heard of it. Probably you got it when you were there. Okay. So yeah, that is more or less the case of major unemployment. And it's kind of interesting that as we go through some issues now, we're thinking some of this may be similar, if not identical, to the issues they went through. Thank goodness not as bad, but still supply chain issues and issues of demand not keeping up with supply and all the rest. But a particular interest, I think, is a matter of the wonderful city that so many of us love, Vienna, Austria. Believe it or not, I'm sure you do, Vienna was one of the primo economic centers of Europe at that time. And you think, but that's just in small Austria. Well, let's remember, in 1918, 1919, Vienna, Austria went on a big diet. Austria-Hungary was no more. So you got this little Austria now, but Vienna, you don't think I'm presumptuous if I say it's almost like a European New York. I mean, it was huge, very cosmopolitan, very urbane. And you know what that means. We got the banks. And of course, a major center of the European economy. And as a result, of course, Vienna will be a great center for financial collapse at that particular time in many of the scenes that we have seen before. That poor man, Herbert Hoover. Don't you figure that he would go home and say to Lou Ann Henry Hoover, honey, I really didn't sign up for this. Coolidge said this was not going to be like this. We thought everything was going to be really nice, but it isn't. But he has that look of stoicism. And I'm thinking the guy was probably not great. I've listened to him, on the radio. I mean, I guess they weren't ready to be, especially media giants, maybe until FDR and the fireside chats. So it was very hard for Herbert Hoover to tell people, let's buck it up, let's keep on smiling. And prosperity is just around the corner and things are going to get better. But all of this is to say that in terms of the international issues, and that's what we're concerned with, in early 1931, and we remember we're just 2 weeks from an election, so we know about politics. And if you were Herbert Hoover, you knew a lot about politics because he'd had a bad 1930, and naturally, he was already thinking about 1932 and re-election. So what he and his advisors try to do financially is say this. In the Hoover moratorium, he says, you know what? Let's just take a year off. And the French are going like, quoi? Yes, they are not happy. Now the Germans are going, whoopee, sounds great, but not the French. I mean, they might have used an ugly word, but the moratorium is an idea we just take a year off and presumably, prosperity is just around the corner. It's dark today, sunshine tomorrow. But that is the idea of the Hoover concept here of that moratorium. I mean, the Germans were not opposed, but at the same time, of course, those with war debts, and that is reparations, I should say, were not happy at all because they wanted their money. And by 1932, we know about the Germans had been, which we like to say in the South, they were piddling. You know that term, when you hear people say that and you think, what do you mean piddling? I mean, they're not doing anything. Let's get on with it. Do I need to kick you? Sometimes with our youth, we need to do that. They need to be reprimanded. We give them the big M, motivation. And so, all of this is what we need to do because the Germans have been dawdling and saying, yeah, maybe next week we can get you a check, but things are a little tight right now. We know people like that. But yeah, nobody in this room, but people of that sort. But that is the idea that this particular situation had not changed and really just got worse. But you don't think the Germans and the French were saying like, we are just getting that check off in the mail to Washington. We got that. We sent it. Remember airmail when you used to have those stamps? And you remember that? We sending it airmail to Washington because we want you to, because we really want to pay off. We're really concerned about it. We stay up nights thinking about it. Yeah, right. So, not a good situation. But whether they liked it or not, that's what would go on. And this is my tourist recommendation for the day. Yes, I can't send you away without something happy and pleasant. Delta is ready when you are. Lausanne is absolutely beautiful. And you're thinking, well, why couldn't they go somewhere less beautiful? Well, I don't think they are interested in that. These people are of a status that they go to the best. They represent, oh gosh, France and Germany, Britain, and Italy. Let's hear it for the boss. And all of these basically attend. And I decided to show you this just to show you. This is page 1 with all the delegates. I don't know if people care that much about the details of financial conferences, the USA Today, you all don't get that, do you? I mean, I think that's a bit crude, but the idea of the daily paper, this would have been very, very significant in that time. Because I'm thinking the elites would look at that paper and they would all know about Lausanne. And why is Lausanne important? For reasons that would make the French very unhappy and make the Germans very happy. And that is, they would basically say, gee, Mom, no more payments. Or debts are over, reparations are over. We just need to move on and get to work building up our economy. Because we got problems. We got lots of problems. So that is what they tried to do. And this would be from the moratorium to saying that's the end of it. You know how you do? You might say, well, you can't use the car for a certain time. And then you go, well, now I've decided to, those of you who are strict disciplinarians, yes, you understand what I mean. But that's the idea that at Lausanne, they were making these decisions. You say, well, why not Geneva? Well, I think that's a very good question. I think it's because the United States was involved and because, Geneva sort of represents the League. And so we want to make this a different kind of meeting, if you will. Now, here's my picture for our tourist. I know. That's nice. And I mean, you wouldn't be saying any Days Inn or something like that. I mean, this is for those, high class. Yeah.
No golden cherry.
Okay. No. Yeah. Oh, yes. Opelika. That's a shame. Opelika should not be. But yeah, they're not there. And look at that water and look at the mountains. I'm telling you, I'm not thinking these people were thinking about economics all the time. I mean, I'm sure they were saying, and yes, this is really unfortunate. I hope things will get better. It's been real. I'm glad I got to see you. All of the things one says. But the Lausanne Conference of 1932, and you're thinking, oh, gee, isn't that during the Depression? Yeah, but I'm still thinking they got reduced rates. I'm thinking they got a good deal. Wouldn't be like rooms during the Arkansas game, would it? Just noting. You can only imagine what they're getting for a room right now. But yeah, I just thought that was so beautiful in Lausanne, Switzerland. And again, free from the League influence, but I think a place where the Americans could come and feel that they had a great significance. Well, of course, as they always used to say, happy days are here again. Oh, yeah. 1932 and the New Deal and all the rest of it. The odd thing for us now, and I'm thinking this may have started maybe 1949, that is the inauguration of the president in January. Because back in that day and age, it was in March. And so you think that that's very, very strange. You're in the middle of a depression. The two men loathe each other. The outgoing and incoming presidents. So any back and forth about let's work together and let's give me a big hug or any of that. Lou Henry, meet Eleanor. No, it's very chilly. And all of this goes on because of course Hoover wants some sort of commitment from FDR about economic policies, and Roosevelt's unwilling to give it. All of that means, as far as I'm concerned, is that there is lessened interest in the world economic situation so that the United States can focus on its own economic crisis, which is entirely understandable. But as we all know, it involves an enormous amount of money for the United States, while the rest of these places are really suffering. So the effects of the New Deal are not altogether helpful for the European situation. Now, as far as we are thinking about other leaders, we always remember who comes to power on January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler. So we understand then that he is in position ahead of FDR, which I find interesting because it's not as if he had been there in January, he could have done anything about it, despite the idea of some that he could just come in some wonderful night and save the world. But it is interesting that for this time, say January to March, the activities of the Hitlerian crowd were already going on. I found this to be an interesting illustration. I'm sure we've all had relatives, older family relatives who talk about the failure of the bank. Oh God. And the thought of that, that's pretty scary because, we are not lovers of money, but we're concerned about the security of money. How is that? I want to make it sound as nice as I can. But yeah, but that's absolutely amazing. Bank failures everywhere. And in this particular case, Vienna. Yeah. And this has got to be going on everywhere. And you got all these people who are there, and you can just imagine young and old, middle class, lower class. I know. It's pretty scary for those of us who are concerned about financial security. But I thought this was particularly interesting when we think about Vienna, because Austria is going to be very important to our story. And I just think it's very interesting that as early as 2930, the Austrian government is going to heck in a handbasket. I mean, remember back in 1919, let me take you back to Paris. The Austrians had asked to become part of Germany, saying, well, we are Germans. So you're forming all these nations, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Yeah. Yeah, he's got very specific taste. Frank has very specific taste. Okay. I was testing him and the test works beautifully. Yeah. But anyway, the idea though is seriously, you can just imagine that was not a name that took a long time to say. It wasn't like, maybe we can talk about it, or, maybe next year we could. No, it'll never happen. You're a bad country, you little Austria, you're not. So anyway, all of that is to say that there goes massive bank failure in Vienna. And of course, Austria is beautiful. We all love the sound of music. Who doesn't love Salzburg? All of that, Chamber of Commerce, get it. But the economic concerns that are involved in Vienna cover the whole area of Central and virtually all of non-communist Eastern Europe. It's amazing the influence considering the small size of Vienna. At least I found it amazing. Now, will liberal democracy last in this kind of atmosphere? Because it had a so-so democratic government in Austria, but I think they call it tenuous. I think that's a word, but it's not like solid. We're going 1776. I don't think so. We'll get to that. But we do know something that's not tenuous, and that's the rule of Stalin. Remember Mr. Browning, the sonnets to the Portuguese? How many ways do I love thee? Let me count the ways. That's the way Soviet literature would paint Joseph Stalin. Man who presumably went to the bad place, in 1953. But by the period that we are talking, he was very, very powerful. And you think, well, I guess these kinds of illustrations would have been rare. Au contraire, they would have been everywhere. Could you imagine in today's world if they'd had Facebook or something, and you would get all this media saying, I think of you so much, Joe Stalin. I love you. And this is worldwide. You're not just dear to Soviets. We love you in America. We love you everywhere. Yeah, I mean, they will develop this whole cult. Now, some people who would visit would say they've got some growing to do. They got some exciting developments. This has to do with what we call collectivization. I know, Carolyn, you know about. And talk about Ukraine, boy. That is a very important chapter in Ukrainian history because, as you know, that was part of the Soviet Union. And the idea of collectivization is taking over all farming for the state. And if you happen to be a farmer who has your own land or your own livestock, there's going to be big, big trouble. Collectivization, which may have caused the death of millions of people, was not as well covered in the press as it might have been, but they did cover the 5-year plans, which Stalin's propaganda would say we finished in 4. Yeah, everything has just been fantastic. And what are people going to say? Well, I just beg to differ. I don't think so. You shut your mouth. So all of this is, I just love this picture because not a wrinkle. He just got everything together. And the idea is, you Westerners, I'm sorry about your depression, but here in the Soviet Union, we're happy. We're working and we're into work and love. Because we love our Stalin. Big Joe. The cult of Stalin and all the rest, you know, they even had a miner to travel around the Soviet Union because he could mine the most ore in so much time. So he would do like appearances. Oh, you remember Phil Donahue or shows like that? And he would come on and they would go like, wow, sir. He said, well, it's all because of the inspiration of Joseph Stalin. I wouldn't have done this. Really? Are you serious? Yeah. I love him so. And it's not like somebody's going to say, I know, but it's not going to say, unless you have somebody who wants trouble, who wants to get up there and say, I think that's not exactly true. But that could be troubling. In any event, that's what's going on when we talk in the early 30s, the cult of Joseph Stalin. And remember, we're getting ready for the purge trials when we're going to cleanse out. Didn't you know Joe Stalin? Maybe you need to come with me. We would like to talk to you. You don't, you keep moving if they tell you that. That's not good. Yeah, that's not good at all. And don't try the Fifth Amendment. That won't work there. So we know that. But it's kind of interesting to me. Now, this man, Lincoln Stephens, you may remember him from your American history. And if any of you spent lots of times in California, he was from Carmel. Now, I love Auburn Opelika, but this is nice too, okay? They have no golden cherry. Don't even ask. But Carmel is there, and he lived there and died there in 1936. But during his lifetime, he would be one of the earliest and most famous of the muckrakers. Now, most of us know Ida Tarbell. If I were to get to a convention of muckrakers, I imagine, I don't know if they would know this man enough, but I just found his quotation kind of interesting because he would change his tune later on. Oh, yeah. I think we call it revisionism. But it seemed like a good idea at the time. Like, wow, it's wonderful. Back in the USSR, right? Ringo, remember, John? You know, it's that whole thing. And wow, Stalinville. I just can't get enough of this place. And everybody's so happy. And America is really a bad scene, man. They got it good in the Soviet Union. And you're thinking, really? Well, I'm sure he would find reason to change his views. But he died in 1936, but I guess there was still time enough that maybe the purge trials. But Trotsky was still alive, dear Trotsky, yes. But yes, certain, shall we say, enemies of the state were disposed of. And I'm pretty sure that Lincoln Stephens, being newspaper reporter, you know, the whole Jimmy Olsen, the whole Daily Planet, you know, we're investigating and we're going to find out. But I thought that was interesting. Dying in Carmel by the Sea.
Nice place.
It is nice, but Lee County, I don't know. I don't know. We can test out both and then reach a conclusion, maybe. Is Delta ready to go to Carmel? Yeah. LAX, or can we go closer? Yeah. But anyway, it'll be a nice trip and find out about serving the proletariat and all of that. But I think they're pretty bourgeois, if you ask me. I don't think there are too many people that are into the life of simplicity.
7 million kulaks can't be wrong.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, but he lived in Carmel, which just cracks me up. And he's going around there and saying, I love your collective farms. Those are so nice. And you know, say that about the kulaks. That is to say, the property owning farmers. They were actually eliminated, liquidated as a class. And they killed the animals. I mean, the kulaks themselves, they didn't want the government to get them. And they would turn over their crops to prevent the government from getting. I think it's all very interesting and tragic and a very important part of Ukrainian history. Because as we all know by now, Ukraine is vital to the Eastern European economy, isn't it, agriculturally speaking? And now here we are at Weimar. Sadly, the great experiment by the early 1930s in liberal democracy had now failed. We ask ourselves sometimes, Yeah, whose fault was that? Well, I don't know if it's anybody's fault because it started with that Versailles, treaty, the war guilt. It had been established with the emperor gone 2 days before. If you look over and over again at all of the facts, it would be very hard to have understood this to be successful. I mean, there were many people who wanted a communist regime. And I mean, among them was the father of communism, going back to Marx and Lenin. They always said, Russia, yuck. Russia's so backward. But Germany, so advanced. They're perfect for communism. And you know why? Because they got an advanced economy. Oh, yeah. Engels' father was a wealthy manufacturer. I mean, you got all these economic interests that would be called advanced, and poor Russia was just not like that. But it didn't happen, except the communists had their political party, because of course, like people today, those Germans wanted everybody to have a say. That's why we love democracy, right? It's all about freedom of speech. Whether you are Catholic, Lutheran, Jewish, nothing. I mean, it's like all of that in the Weimar period, it was meant to provide an atmosphere of freedom. And as we've learned all too well, sometimes that level of freedom doesn't work as well simply because people want to take advantage of it in a bad way. They want it for them, but not for you. So that is what we see there, here. The idea was that on and on and on. And again, it's a very short period, 1919 to 1933. And, when you say that to someone who's like super young, they go like, gosh. But if I say it to me, it's like, that was nothing. That was yesterday. I got up then. I remember that day. But yeah, it's very different. But again, people ask me sometimes, do I think that people are longing for the emperor to come back from the Netherlands? I doubt it. I mean, it was an interesting piece of history, nostalgia, the way we were and all of that. But I'm not sure there was any Hohenstaufens or bust, that sort of thing. I think basically there was a feeling that we need to move on, but we need to move on something that is not serving the interests, perhaps, of the Soviets, serving the West, or serving those Americans who want their money. We all remember the Dolls Plan. Who could forget? And all of the money that was involved in keeping up the Germans. And I don't think anybody would say, let it go. Money here, money there. I don't think we're there yet in history. I think that's more modern. I think we were looking forward to getting it back someday. And in fact, did you know after World War II, payments would resume and much of it would be repaid in the 1980s? Absolutely. It's amazing to think about. The scene of the feeding of the children and the adults in 1932 would give you an idea. By American standards, maybe 6 million won't sound too bad, but after all, the size of the two places, is so very different. And this would mean a massive section of the German populace did not have the wherewithal because, of course, they were dependent on resources that were no longer available. So think about that, 1932, and how close we are to these very difficult times. Because all of this, as you know, I mean, you have all this in the streets, in German cities. My sense is that the larger the place, the more likely there's going to be trouble between left and right. And it doesn't necessarily mean the well-to-do classes, obviously, but the others will certainly make up for it because they are more people. And soup is nice, but that is not going to serve for an improved economy. Now let's look at some of the alternatives to the German government, because Weimar lasted a long time. And guess what? We're starting in Spain. Yes, we are. And you say, why Spain? Well, not Franco. No, it's before Franco's time. But here we're going to have the idea that a strong man can get us out of our trouble. And a strong man, I'm using in the term of sort of like a mythological hero, you know, that sort of thing, Wagnerian. And we will come forward and bring relief to the people, and they will love us for it. In the case of Spain, Spain at this particular point had had its share of issues. It had an unstable monarchy, an economy that was not well developed, and many conflicts between the right and the left. Because you know what most people were? They were farm workers. Surprise, surprise. Yes. They were out doing it day in, day out. And it was not a pleasant life, shall we say. It was overwhelmingly Roman Catholic. And of course, when anyone Spanish, this Portuguese or French came in and said, hi, I'm from your local branch of the Comintern and wonder if I could talk to you all. And I imagine that's not going to go over well, because communism would definitely represent a threat. You think we would like to invite you to mass, and you want to sit on my pew, and I'll introduce you to our priest? No, it's like the whole contradiction of the two groupings, which I find fascinating, particularly when we get to this person. And that he may be familiar to some of you, Primo de Rivera. But you say, but where is Franco? Oh, he's in the army. He's busy. He's busy, but thanks for asking. Yeah, he's coming to a class near you. Don't you worry. But we're not ready for it. I wanted to surprise you. So we don't need to wait till the 30s to have dictators. We can have dictators. But Primo is differently. He's, of course, he did a questionnaire and said, do you like the greatest hits of Marx and Lenin? Yeah. And it would be, no. But I'm Catholic, and I'm really not interested in talking to Presbyterians. Or, it's like, I like the old ways. And they ask him, maybe we can set up little farms for peasants. And this military man, he may have talked about that for a while, but he read the sort of public temper of the ruling class, as he said. Probably not. In other words, Primo de Rivera, 7 years. And you say, why did he have so much support? Well, I think he had support only because, of course, he said, I'm getting the monarchy ready to be restored. And you know, what are they all going? Olay, olay. You know, we want that. Go big M, monarchy. So the idea is this will be a great moment for Spain.
Huh.
Yeah, finally, he gave up, had a bad election, and apparently ended up in Paris where he died, which I think is rather interesting. I mean, talk about a very not glorious end. I mean, not that I'm knocking going to Paris, but Primo de Rivera was an interesting character and certainly somebody who was significant, even though I'm thinking if I were to go out on the streets of Auburn tonight, now just bear with me. Do you think everybody would know Franco, right? No? Okay. I just tried. And they certainly would know Primo. No Primo? No, okay. Not those creatures over there either, I'm sure. But yes, we understand then that people need more study, more reading, and more virtuous behavior. Yeah, so yeah, that is it. I just think Primo is interesting, but not nearly as interesting as his son. And the reason is he's the founder of the fascists. The whole issue of fascism comes up repeatedly. And I mean, Primo, father, is not to me a fascist. He's simply someone who's trying to restore the monarchy. He wants to hold up the rights of the nobility, the aristocracy, church.
Big time.
Yeah, so if you want to bring in some Lutheran group, you forget it.
No Jews.
Okay. But all of that is to say that this movement, which comes under his son, is quite different. And is in fact not the movement of Francisco Franco, but it's this man's. As you can figure out by looking at him, he did not live a long time. He died in 1936 at the age of 33. An attorney and someone who was devoted to similar ideals of that of his father, but like the boss, Il Duce, he was sort of like, I'll use the army and I will establish the authority of the crown and bring about a better Spain. Well, unfortunately for him, some people replaced his father that didn't like his ideas, and they were part of what we call the Spanish Republic. And so he and his younger brother, sad to say, were both executed by the Spanish government in the mid-1930s. So what does that make him? Oh, we love them. Martyrs. Martyr, martyr, martyr. Because you say, yeah, well, I'm interested in Marxism. How about it, bud? How about it, Antonio? You want to hang out and read Prejudice of Karl Marxism? No, because all of these phalanges want a law and order. They want a new day in Spain, but they don't necessarily want a religious state or any necessary traditions. Franco is probably, if you want to know the truth, this is my opinion, is more of a traditional Catholic military leader, not so much a fascist. But these people who held him up, Jose Antonio, they were very useful for the cause, which of course is coming very soon indeed to Spain. And it's very odd when you stop and think about it, because Spain is obviously not the center of the industrialized world. I mean, it's there, not that far from Britain or France, but that became a big center of communism. Oh, yeah, and plenty of anarchists too. And those rascals, they could be quite dangerous. Yeah, because terror was their middle name. So, yeah, this whole movement thing became very important. But anyway, he was the martyr, he was the hero. And of course, we all know this one. I don't know why he got to be so famous, the Mosleys and, his wife and all of that. But again, I guess it's because of these movements. Would Britain have really gone fascist? I just don't believe it. No more than I think it would have gone communist. I guess there were a lot of people who would come out there. Could you imagine now, television or the internet? Oh, God. Because luckily they didn't have all that back then. But people took pictures or photographs and they had their uniforms and they could knock around and say, "We love you, Sir Oswald, we love you." And, all of these fascist cults. Does it have anything to do with the Windsors or the House of Lords? I really doubt it. Again, I just think this is part of the time they were in. Because I'm thinking, when you think of the Brits, there were plenty of British communists. Don't you worry about that. So then you got the other extreme, because they got Sir Oswald, and he says, "I love you. I want to be your leader. And I'll get you a fresh uniform. We have your size. We have your size right in stock. It just came in this morning." Yeah, so right there. So obviously the idea of the fascist groups. And I found out he and his wife spent much of World War II. Yes. They had time, I guess, play chess, do crosswords. I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't in touch with the Fuhrer. They were there. What is that prison called? Man, I can't even think of the name of it now. But anyway, I don't really think he was dangerous, but the British, with the idea of a fascist, was very unpopular. So I think constitutional rights were pretty much let go during this time. As we saw in Hastings, that series, which I just love. I love this. Do you all know Renee Cody, the perfume? I didn't know about all this. I really didn't. But he is the father of the Cody perfumer in South France. He died in 1934. I'm sure the family's still living now. I'm not sure. I'm sure somebody bought them out long ago, but the idea being that these people, I think that is Renee Cody, who died in 1934. And you think, what's a fascist doing in a nice country like this? It might be in Bordeaux, and it's like, well, we haven't got jobs. And the communists are dangerous, and they just got a lot of problems. And we love you, Monsieur Rene. And we're all about France, go big, yeah. You know the way people get excited. You know, the 11 o'clock Saturday. You know the way people get. You all get excited. And that is the idea. The marching, is that important? Well, that's 1934. And we do move on to other movements. I'm just showing it to you because it's simply another instance of there's always a fascist group wherever you are. It doesn't mean everybody's everybody doing it. I mean, there are plenty of Catholics. Oh, yeah. There are plenty of socialists, pinkers, plenty of reds, communists. There are all kind of folks out there, in France. But I just thought it was interesting in terms of turning to the leader who will not be here much longer. So that was 1934. Now, this one really cracked me up. They're called Rexes. Now, this is something for an after-game party. Yeah. Oh, you will be the queen. Because these young scholars who are at your parties will go like, do Rexes have something to do with Rex King? Yes. Yes, they had very much to do with it. This was a Belgian Catholic movement. This is very small. This is not information that everyone has. So, yeah, this is all included in your all tuition. And I can get you more work if you ever. So the likelihood of you're running into any Rexes on Magnolia or anywhere out there, hey, mister, are you a Rexes? No, but these people think Belgian fascists, let's really get small. Yeah, I think this is pretty much a small group. Everybody's got them. I started to bring the Dutch, but I decided to let it go with Belgium. Oh, yeah. And yeah, I mean, and they, of course, by this point, I think it's pretty much over Christ the King. I think they've kind of moved on from there. And these Rexes, they got the strong man, and I'm assuming that during the time in the future, they will more or less fall into the occupation when the Germans come to Belgium, because as we know, that's coming. But all of this, I would think, just is another symptom of the Depression. And I just brought these various places up, like France and Belgium, because I think we're all shocked and you think, gosh, I wonder if Jacques and every Pierre, they were all out there at the meeting in Belgium. I don't think so. I think they were there, but I don't lurid. Not necessarily people we invite to our home. Okay. These are not young scholars. Okay. So keep your distance. But yeah, you can imagine we want Belgium. Go Big B. I mean, yeah, you just don't think about it that way. Maybe you ask the people of the Congo, maybe. Yeah. In any event, so we've had our survey, and now we have our tour of the countries, starting in the West, with the Irish Free State. And I thought you would love that. And I'm going to tell you, the Irish did not like it. You would think, what do they want? They want everything that's British gone. So an Irish Free State, they said, well, we're going to let you be a Dominion. Aren't you happy about that? No. We want you out of all of Ireland. And they didn't get it, but they got pretty close. There we have, of course, see that area of the Rhineland. And we talked so much about that highly significant area of economic development, and the French and the Belgians utilizing that area because they felt they deserved it. And you see Austria, and you see our friends in Poland. I heard a negative Okay, but I'll pretend I didn't hear that, but uh-oh, there's something about the Polish corridor. I think that's not pleasant at all. And you can see that. And, I would love to know if I were like Dante or someone who could go and talk to the people in the next world and say, did you really think that that was going to work? Because, but could you imagine being on that highway and being in a German and going from one part to another? It was, in fact, a very, very bad situation. But then let's go south, the place many people would say the happiest place on earth. And I prefer, of course, to Czechoslovakia.
It is.
Yes. Well, if you believe that, then there we go. All kinds of happy people. The veritable Switzerland of Central Europe. Okay, all kinds of people. I love you, Slav. I love you too, German. Right. We'll see about that. But you see that, in other words, folks, when we started this course, there were all those nice empires. Remember them? Gone. Instead, we've got all these countries. And like living in a dormitory with all of these different people, and sometimes they can be rude and not caring about your rights. Then we understand that sometimes in these big countries, look at Hungary. How do you think the Hungarians felt about? Well, just look at them. There's Romania, Czechoslovakia, and go Czechoslovakia, go Yugoslavia. It's everywhere the Hungarians, and you know what they're thinking? They probably could have used therapy because they're thinking about someday they're going to get it. They're going to get it there because this is all part of the legacy of World War I. Because all of that land had been taken away from the Hungarians. So to understand then the problems that will be inherited, and then of course, look in the east. And I actually got that map just so you could see Ukraine. Because sometimes in all of this, we'll forget Ukraine and not be aware that it been a very significant part of the Soviet Union. Now, if I were Ukrainian, would I get a whole set of Stalin memorabilia? I don't think so, because the Ukrainians suffered. Did you hear, this is months now, when the leader of Russia said something to the effect of, there are all kinds of Nazis in the Ukraine.
They are Nazis, yeah.
And I'm thinking this seems a very strange business, but I guess in terms of justification for his invasion, it sounded very good. All of that then is to say that the Soviet Union from west to east is very huge, and everywhere we love you, Big Joe. Because I don't think we asked your opinion. We just say at ratemydictator.com, and it's got to be a 5-star all the way. Now I'll close with this ghastly sight, because what you have here is Hitler's first cabinet. And this is clearly an example of what we call the problem with liberal democracy. People come together based on the Weimar Constitution, that we form cabinets representing various political. They do that in Israel, for goodness sakes. They do it in France. They do it in a lot of different countries. Thank goodness we don't do it. Because, the way folks fight and carry on. But the idea and we don't have Weimar Germany. We still have Weimar Germany, not much, but we sort of have it. And it is given legitimacy, not by Adolf Hitler taking power, but constitutionally being made, just like that lovely gentleman was yesterday or today in Great Britain.
Right.
I mean, it's all very legal. It was appointed by President von Hindenburg. We don't have a monarchy anymore, so our president appoints it. Why does von Hindenburg appoint him? It's a long story, but it has to do with political power play. And what I wanted you to see in the picture is not that dreadful man, you know, from German Air Force history. Next to him, Goering, many of you know about him. Wasn't he a great Air Force hero in World War I?
Big time ace.
Right. And his father had been in Germany, East Africa. All of that is to say, yes, we have Nazis, but most of these people are with Hitler. Look at him talking to von Papen, who's a good Catholic. He's not a Nazi. There is, you see the tall one at the end, his name is von Neurath. All of these people are from major conservative parties. They hate the communists. They hate the Versailles Peace Treaty. And they think now we can use this little man. But they didn't intend for Adolf Hitler to hang around. From von Hindenburg on down, the idea was we'll clean out the communists and other troubling people, and a new Germany can be established. And I might add, a Germany that will not have Nazis. Will it have a monarchy from the Netherlands? That's debatable. But really, most were saying, we love you, von Hindenburg. Remember how they called him the old gentleman? Now, obviously, he's going to die in 1934. So that's soon. But happily, we don't know those things. But you say, where are the uniforms? Oh, we're not wearing uniforms today. We're all in, as we used to say, military school cities, because it's kind of the look we want to give, which I find interesting, just if you think about how that is going to appear. And we understand that this will have great power and great influence for the future. Well, I'll pick it up there next time. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
We talked about the Axion Francais, one of my favorite.
I'm sorry.
We were talking about the Axion Francais.